I never thought a single blanket could cause so much trouble or so much closeness. But there we were, me and Jamie, on the tiny couch in my cramped apartment, shivering because the heater decided to quit on the coldest night of the year. Neither of us wanted to admit how cold we were, but the fact was, we only had one blanket between us, and it barely covered one person. I'd met Jamie at that stupid trivia night at the bar down the street. You know the type. The guy who seems way too confident, but then gets the answer wrong about something obscure, like who directed The Great Escape. I thought he was a bit tooly at first, but there was this weird charm, the kind that makes you want to know more. Long story short, he ended up crashing at my place because he missed the last train home, and here we were, stuck without heat, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that smelled like old laundry detergent. At first, I was trying to be all macho about it, sitting on one end and pretending the cold wasn't creeping into my bones. Jamie, on the other hand, was this big ball of restless energy, pacing a little and muttering jokes to himself about how modern technology is failing us all. I swear, the guy could lighten the mood even when he looked like he was about to freeze his toes off. I tried to stretch the blanket so it covered both of us, but it was hopeless. He was closer than I expected, and I could feel the heat radiating off his body, the smell of his cologne mixing with the faint scent of pine from the Christmas tree I still hadn't bothered to take down. He caught me looking and just smirked, like he knew exactly what I was thinking. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the air was charged with something I wasn't ready to name. We both laughed when the blanket slipped again and fell to the floor, but then, without a word, Jamie just reached over and pulled me closer under it, not in a joking way, more like it was the most natural thing in the world. I froze for a second, heart thudding in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. And honestly, I didn't pull away. Because for the first time in a long while, being this close to someone felt like the one thing that might keep me warm when the heater didn't. That's when I realized this night, this ridiculous, freezing, only one blanket night was going to change everything. But I had no clue just how much. The first time Jamie pulled me closer under that miserable little blanket, I swear my mind went blank for a second. It was like the cold didn't matter anymore because suddenly the only thing I could focus on was how warm he felt beside me, his arm resting lightly against mine, his breath just a little uneven, like he was trying not to seem too nervous either. I probably looked like an idiot just sitting there, but I didn't care. I just let it happen. We didn't say much at first. The silence was comfortable, like when you're sitting next to someone who gets it, without needing to fill the air with words. But then Jamie broke the quiet. "You know," he said, voice low, "this is probably the worst night for technology to fail us. No heater, one lame blanket, and my phone's on 2%. I chuckled, and even though I was still cold, there was this warmth spreading in my chest I couldn't explain. "Yeah, well, beer goggles don't work as well when you're frozen stiff." He laughed, and it was one of those genuine laughs that makes you want to laugh too, even if it's 10 p.m. on a Tuesday and nothing is really funny. Then he shifted a little and nudged me with his shoulder. "So tell me about you," he said. It felt like a loaded question, but I guess I was ready. "What do you want to know?" "Everything except how many bad puns you've made tonight." I grinned. "Fair. Well, I'm a graphic designer. I work mostly from home, which is great except for nights like this when my heater gives up. I'm a bit of a night owl. Always been that way. What about you?" Jamie shrugged. "I'm a teacher. Middle school math. It's as rewarding and exhausting as you'd imagine." "Middle school math," I said, raising an eyebrow. "You must have a lot of patience." "I have to, or I'd lose my mind," he said, shaking his head. "But it's kind of like a puzzle. Every kid's different, and you just have to find the right way to get through to them." There was a softness to his voice I hadn't heard before. Suddenly, the guy who'd seemed tooly and loud at trivia night felt real. Like more than just a random guy who missed a train. As the blanket shifted and we adjusted to share what little warmth it offered, I noticed how close we were, like really close. My arm brushed against his, and I didn't move it away. His leg touched mine, and I could feel this electricity I wasn't expecting. It made me nervous, but in a good way. Like, Maybe this was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You ever wonder why people say warmth is just about temperature? Because it feels like it's more than that. Like there's this something you get from being near the right person." I blinked, caught off guard. "That's actually kind of beautiful," he smirked. "I'm full of surprises." For a moment, the room felt warmer than the broken heater could ever manage. I glanced at him and caught his eyes, and suddenly it wasn't just cold and blankets and a missed train. It was something else. Something electric. We stayed like that for a while, talking about everything and nothing. Jamie told me about the kid in his class who always asked bizarre questions, and I shared a story about the worst client I'd ever had. The hours slipped by, and I barely noticed how the blanket was no longer an obstacle but a shared space that made me feel less alone. At some point, Jamie shifted again and just rested his head on my shoulder. I didn't move. In fact, I leaned into him a little. It felt natural, like breathing. The cold was still there, but it was like it didn't matter anymore. Then, just as I was starting to think this couldn't get any better, I felt his hand slide up to wrap around mine. Not in a dramatic or forced way, just slow and easy, like it belonged there. My heart did this stupid little jump, and I wanted to say something, but the words got stuck. So I just squeezed his hand back and smiled. That night, with one crappy blanket and no heater, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself in a long time. Being close to someone, really close, could make all the difference. It could make the cold bearable. It could make you feel alive. And as I looked down at Jamie's face, peaceful and warm against my shoulder, I knew this was only the beginning. We ended up drifting off somewhere between half laughs and whispered stories, Jamie's hand still loosely holding mine. I woke up a few hours later to the sound of rain tapping on the window and that familiar cold creeping back in, but instead of pulling away, I shifted closer to him. The blanket was still there, but now it felt more like a bridge between us rather than just a thin piece of fabric. Morning light filtered through the curtains, and I realized Jamie was still asleep, his head resting on my shoulder like he'd been there forever. For a second, I just watched him, the way his hair curled just a bit over his forehead, the hint of a smile playing around his lips even in sleep. It was weird because I'd only known the guy for a night, but I felt this strange kind of peace sitting next to him. Finally, I'd had enough of the cold and the suspense, so I gently nudged him awake. "Hey," I whispered. He blinked a few times, then smiled that same easy smile he had last night. "Morning," he said, voice still thick with sleep. "You're like a human heater," I teased. Jamie laughed softly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "I could say the same to you." We finally peeled ourselves off the couch, both stiff from sleeping in weird positions and still half wrapped in the blanket that somehow managed to survive the night. "I'll make us some coffee," I offered, pulling on a hoodie. Jamie followed me into the kitchen, stretching like a cat. "Thanks. I definitely need it." While the coffee brewed, we stood awkwardly by the counter, not quite ready to let the night's closeness fade away. I could tell Jamie was thinking the same thing, because he finally said, "I wasn't expecting last night to turn out like that." "Neither was I admitted, "but I'm glad it did." He smiled, this time a bit more shy, like he was trying to figure out if I was serious. "Me too." After that, the morning unfolded in this quiet, easy way. We talked about the most random stuff, the kind of things you'd never guess a person cared about. Like how Jamie could recite every line from some 80s movie, or how I had a secret obsession with cheesy pop songs. It was weird how normal it all felt, even though everything about last night was anything but normal for me. Later, when Jamie was getting ready to leave, I caught myself hesitating. Usually, when someone crashed at my place, it was a one-time thing. But with him, I wanted more. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "you want to grab dinner sometime? Like, not because you missed a train or anything?" He raised an eyebrow, that same smirk from trivia night, making a comeback. "Are you asking me out, or just making sure I'm not going to freeze on your couch again?" "Maybe a little bit of both," I admitted. Jamie laughed again, and this time it felt like the kind of laugh that promises something good. "Yeah, I'd like that," he said. And just like that, the weird night with the broken heater and one blanket turned into the start of something I didn't see coming, but didn't want to miss. It was like the universe had cracked open just a little, and I was finally ready to step through. Our first real date wasn't anything fancy. Jamie suggested grabbing pizza at that little dive place a few blocks from my apartment. Because, honestly, who wants to dress up after a night like that? He joked. We showed up, both a little nervous but trying to play it cool, and settled into a corner booth. The place smelled like grease and melted cheese, but there was something comforting about it, like we were both just happy to be out of the cold and in each other's company. We started with the usual small talk. Work stuff, favorite music, terrible movies we secretly loved, but pretty quickly, the conversation shifted. Jamie's eyes lit up when he talked about his students, the challenges and the little victories. I saw this fierce pride in him, like teaching wasn't just a job, but a real calling. And when I shared my own frustrations about freelance work, he listened like it mattered. At some point, the pizza came, and I swear it was the best thing I'd eaten in weeks. We laughed over who got the last slice. Him, of course. And the way he reached across the table, fingers brushing mine, sent this jolt straight through me. I caught myself staring at the curve of his smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, and felt something inside me shift. I'd been downplaying this whole thing, acting like it was just a fluke, a night of bad luck that somehow turned warm. But now, sitting here with Jamie so close, the idea of him not being part of my life felt wrong. After dinner, as we walked back toward my place under a sky smeared with stars, the cold wasn't nearly as biting as it had been that first night. Jamie's hand brushed against mine, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I reached out and took it. His fingers curled around mine, like they'd been waiting for it. We didn't say anything for a bit, just walking side by side, sharing the quiet. And in that silence, I felt like I could finally breathe. Back at my apartment, the heater was still on the fritz, but Jamie just laughed. Guess we're getting good at the blanket shuffle. I grabbed the blanket from the couch, and we curled up together again, like old pros. But this time, nothing felt awkward or forced. It was just natural, two people finding warmth in each other. He leaned his head on my chest, and I ran my fingers through his hair, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You know," he murmured, "I never thought a night like that would change anything. But here we are." "Yeah," I said softly, "here we are." The days that followed were a mix of getting to know each other and trying to figure out what this all meant. We went on more dates, coffee shops, movie nights, lazy afternoons wandering the city just talking about everything and nothing. I found myself looking forward to his texts, the way his voice sounded when he called, and the way he smiled at me like I was the only person in the room. But it wasn't always easy. There were moments when I caught myself pulling back, unsure if I was ready to open up again. Jamie sensed it, but didn't push. Instead, he stayed patient, showing up with a quiet kind of support that made me realize maybe I didn't have to carry everything alone. One night, a few weeks after that first blanket incident, we were lying on the couch again, sharing the same worn-out blanket that had become our unofficial symbol. He looked at me, eyes serious for the first time in a while. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Always," I replied. "Are you scared?" "Of this, whatever it is between us." I hesitated. The truth was, yeah, I was scared. Scared of getting hurt, of messing things up, of letting someone in and losing myself in the process. But looking at Jamie, feeling the warmth spread through me, I knew I didn't want fear to win. "Yeah," I admitted, "but I'm more scared of missing out on something real." He smiled then, that easy, understanding smile, and pulled me closer. "Good," he said, "because I'm not going anywhere." And just like that, the cold nights, the broken heater, the one blanket, they all became part of our story. A story about taking chances, holding on, and finding warmth where you least expect it. After that night, things between Jamie and me settled into a rhythm that felt strangely right. We weren't rushing or pushing. We just existed in this little bubble where getting closer didn't feel scary but necessary. It was the kind of comfort I never realized I craved until it was there. One Friday evening, maybe 3 weeks after everything started, Jamie showed up at my doorstep with that same crooked grin. He held a takeout bag from that new Thai place down the street. "I figured we should do dinner without the pizza for once," he said, stepping inside and shrugging off his jacket. I laughed, stepping aside to let him in. "High class, huh?" he grinned. "It's the little things. We sat on the floor in front of the couch, the takeout containers open between us, and dug in. The spicy flavors hit my tongue, and Jamie immediately started fanning his mouth, laughing at himself. "How do you eat this stuff and not explode?" I teased. "I'm a glutton for punishment," he said, smirking. Between bites, we fell into one of those conversations where you just keep peeling back layers. Jamie told me about a trip he took last year, how he'd wandered through Europe solo and learned a lot about himself, even though he hated being alone. "Funny, isn't it?" he said, looking at me. "Sometimes you think you want space, but what you really want is someone to share it with." I nodded because, honestly, I felt that same way for a while. I'd been running on autopilot, thinking I was fine alone. But with Jamie, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities. After dinner, we cleaned up together, trading silly stories about our most embarrassing moments. Jamie tripped over my rug and almost face-planted, and I teased him relentlessly. It was the kind of easy intimacy I'd only read about or seen in movies, but hadn't believed was real for me. Later, we moved back to the couch, wrapped again in our trusty blanket, more out of habit than necessity now since the heater was finally fixed. Jamie rested his head on my shoulder, and I could feel his breath warm against my neck. "So," he said after a while, "what's the plan for us?" I looked down at him, surprised by the directness but glad he brought it up. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing or some casual fling. I want to see where this goes," I confessed, feeling a little vulnerable but honest. Jamie smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Me too." I wasn't sure at first, but now, I'm all in. We sat there, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling, and I realized I was falling for him. Harder than I expected, but it felt good. Like finding your way home after walking in circles for too long. A few days later, I invited Jamie to a small gathering with some friends. It was the first time I introduced him around, and I was nervous about how it would go. But Jamie handled it like a pro, easy, funny, and somehow effortlessly charming. After the party, as we walked home under the streetlights, Jamie slipped his hand into mine again. "You're really something, you know that," he said softly. I squeezed his hand back. "I'm just glad you're here." Winter was still hanging on, but the cold didn't bother me anymore, because now I had Jamie beside me, a real person who made all those late-night shivers and one-blanket struggles worth it. One night, a couple of weeks later, we were lying in bed, finally sharing a bed, which felt like a huge step, and Jamie looked over at me with those thoughtful eyes. "Do you think we're ready for the next step?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. "What next step?" He laughed nervously. "You know, meeting parents, official, boyfriend, stuff." I took a deep breath. The thought was scary but also exciting. "Yeah, I think I want that. With you." His smile was all the answer I needed. "Good. Because I want that too." And in that moment, with Jamie's hand in mine, and a future suddenly feeling a lot less uncertain, I knew that one blanket night was never just about staying warm. It was about finding the one person who could make the cold disappear. The idea of introducing Jamie to my parents felt like this huge mountain looming ahead, even though I'd never been one to stress about family gatherings. But this wasn't just any friend I was bringing home. This was someone who mattered. Someone who'd pulled me closer on that freezing night and never really let go. I kept picturing how it would go down, whether my parents would notice how I looked at him, or if there'd be that awkward silence when the topic of what we are came up. I replayed conversations in my head, rehearsed answers, all the stuff you do when you're nervous about putting your heart on the line. Jamie, though, he was calm as ever. "Hey," he said one evening as we sat on my couch, "whatever happens, just be yourself." That's who I like. It was simple, but it hit me. Maybe that was all I needed. Just be me. So when the weekend finally rolled around and we drove up to my parents' place, I was a bundle of nerves. Jamie beside me cracked jokes to keep things light, but I could feel the tension in my chest. My parents greeted us warmly. My mom pulled Jamie into a big hug, and my dad gave that classic, slightly awkward but genuine smile. We moved to the living room, and I could tell Jamie was doing his best to make small talk, asking about my dad's latest fishing trip and my mom's garden. After dinner, when my parents had retired to the kitchen to clean up. Jamie and I sat on the couch, and my dad came over, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "He seems like a good guy, son," he said quietly. I glanced at Jamie, who gave me a small nod, and felt this surge of relief. Maybe it wasn't as scary as I thought. Later that night, after my parents had gone to bed, Jamie and I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket he'd brought along. The stars were bright, and the air was crisp. "I'm glad we did this," Jamie said softly. "I know it's not easy to open up." I nodded, feeling the weight of the day lifting. "Yeah, me too." He looked over at me, eyes searching. "I want you to know something. Whatever comes next, I'm here. Not just for the good parts, but everything." I reached out, taking his hand. "I want that too." Back in the city, things felt different. Sharing that weekend had shifted something between us, made everything feel more real, more solid. A couple of weeks later, I found myself standing in front of an apartment building, keys jangling nervously in my hand. Jamie had been dropping hints for a while, and finally, I'd agreed. We'd move in together. The thought was scary and thrilling all at once. Could two people really share a space and not drive each other crazy? Could we build a home from two lives that had been so separate? Jamie greeted me at the door with a grin and a pizza box. "Welcome home," he said. We spent that evening unpacking boxes, arguing over where to put furniture, and laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. When the night finally settled, we curled up on the couch, that familiar blanket wrapped around us, and it felt like the start of something new. One night, as we lay there, Jamie turned to me and said, "Remember that first night? The blanket? The cold?" I smiled. "How could I forget?" He squeezed my hand. "I don't think I'll ever take warmth for granted again, especially the kind that comes from someone else." I kissed his forehead, feeling the truth of it deep in my bones. Me neither. And in that quiet apartment, with one blanket still between us, I knew that no matter what the future held, we'd face it together, warm, close, and ready for whatever came next. Living together was a whole new chapter, and honestly, it was a mix of excitement and trial by fire. I mean, sure, Jamie and I had this connection that made us close even in the coldest situations, but sharing a space, that tested more than just how well you can share a blanket. The first weekend in the apartment, we spent more time assembling furniture than actually relaxing. I swear that IKEA bookshelf nearly broke us. There was a moment when Jamie, armed with an Allen wrench, looked at me and said, "Are you sure this isn't a test to see if we can survive a breakup?" I laughed, but inside I felt the same way. Like if we could get through this without killing each other, we were golden. We had our little routines pretty quickly. Jamie was the early riser, always making coffee, and somehow finding the energy to do a quick workout before work. I was the night owl, usually sprawled on the couch, elbow deep in design projects or binge-watching bad TV shows. Somehow, we balanced it without stepping on each other's toes. One evening, after a long day, I got home and found Jamie in the kitchen, making this ridiculous 3-course meal. Not that he was a chef or anything. He just had this weird energy where he got super into cooking when he was stressed. "What's all this?" I asked, genuinely impressed and a little confused. Jamie looked up, flour dusting his cheek. "I read somewhere that cooking can be therapeutic," he said, then grinned. Thought I'd test the theory. We sat down, and even though the food was a little overcooked in parts, it tasted like the best thing I'd ever eaten. We talked about our days, joked about the weird things our coworkers did, and just enjoyed the quiet company. As the weeks passed, the little things became moments I treasured. Waking up next to him, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, the way his laugh filled the apartment when I made some dumb joke. I caught myself thinking, more than once, that this felt like home. But it wasn't always perfect. One night, a fight broke out over something ridiculous, who had left the lights on in the bathroom. It started with teasing, but quickly spiraled into frustration about work, stress, and feeling overwhelmed. Jamie looked at me, eyes flashing with emotion. "I'm sorry, man. It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to ask for help." I sighed, realizing I felt the same way but hadn't said it. "Me too. I'm scared of messing this up because it's the first time I've let someone this close." We ended up sitting on the floor, blanket wrapped around us like a shield, and talked long into the night. It wasn't easy, but it was honest, and somehow that made everything stronger. One night, as the city lights twinkled outside, Jamie reached over and took my hand. "You know," he said, voice soft, "I think we're building something real here, not just a relationship, but a home." I smiled, heart full. "Yeah, and I'm not going anywhere." A few months in, we faced another milestone. Our first holiday season together. We decided to combine our traditions, which meant a chaotic but heartwarming mix of my family's old-school Christmas and Jamie's more laid-back, let's just eat too much and watch movies vibe. I was nervous about how Jamie would fit in with my family's loud, affectionate style, but he surprised me. When he laughed at my dad's terrible jokes and helped my mom decorate the tree, I felt this swell of pride. It was like he'd already become part of the family. That Christmas Eve, after the presents and the chaos, Jamie and I found ourselves sitting alone on the balcony, the city twinkling below us. "I didn't think I'd be here a year ago," he said, squeezing my hand. "Not like this." "Neither did I admitted. "But I can't imagine being anywhere else." He leaned into me, and for a moment the cold was gone, replaced by something warmer than any heater could provide. That blanket we'd shared so many times, it felt like just a symbol now of how far we'd come, from two strangers shivering in the dark to something real and steady. And honestly, I can't wait to see where this goes next. A year since that freezing night with one blanket, I found myself sitting on our worn-out couch, the same one where Jamie had first pulled me closer. The heater was humming quietly, the city's winter chill kept at bay, but honestly, it was the warmth between us that mattered most. We'd weathered the small storms, the fights over leaving lights on, the stress of work, the awkward introductions, the mix of family traditions, and none of it was perfect. But it was ours. Real, messy, and somehow beautiful. That evening, Jamie caught me off guard. He reached over, fingers finding mine without a word, and pulled me gently closer under a heavier blanket we'd bought together. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic announcement. Just the quiet certainty that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. I looked down at him, the same easy smile in his eyes that had hooked me from the start. And in that moment, all the nervousness, the doubts, the fears melted away. It wasn't about the blanket or the cold anymore. It was about two people choosing to share their warmth day after day. "I'm glad you missed that train," I said softly. Jamie laughed, a little breathless. "Me too." We stayed like that for a long time. No words needed, just the comfort of each other's presence. It struck me how far we'd come, from strangers shivering in a cold apartment to partners building a life together. The kind of life where a single blanket wasn't a problem, because we'd already found something much warmer. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted. Not perfection, not fireworks or grand declarations, but quiet moments like this, where love feels steady and real, pulled close and held tight. Sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, that's everything.